Look at this photo. A husband, a pregnant wife, two little girls, all smiling on a family trip. If someone showed you this picture on the street and said, "Guess what happens next?" you'd never guess it in 100 years. This man strangled his wife. Then he strangled his two daughters. Then he drove all three bodies to the oil field where his wife worked, buried her in a shallow grave, and dropped his daughters into the crude oil tanks. This is the Chris Watts case, and I'm going to tell you why, 6 years later, people still can't stop talking about it. It's not just the murders. It's the sheer volume of footage we have. Police body cams, interrogation room recordings, home videos his wife posted online for years, text messages, a courtroom confession. We're not reconstructing this case from witness memories. We're watching it happen almost in real time on camera. And that's what makes it so unsettling. Because this isn't a mystery about who did it. Everyone knows who did it. This is a mystery about how a man does this. How someone skips right past divorce, the easiest exit in the world, and chooses murder instead. So let's build his psychology from the ground up. And we start with body language. August 13th, 2018. Shanann Watts' close friend Nicole can't reach her. No calls back, no texts back. So Nicole does the only sane thing. She calls the police to check on her. Officers arrive at the house and find Chris there. His story: he left for work around 5 a.m., hadn't seen his wife since. Simple enough. Except watch what happens next, because this is where the mask starts slipping. When police tell Chris they can't reach his wife and she isn't answering the door, his response is, "Just wait." Think about that for 1 second. Your pregnant wife and two young daughters are missing, and your instinct is to tell the police to wait? A husband who has nothing to hide says get in the house right now. Check every room. Even if you assume the most generous version, maybe she fainted in the shower. Maybe he doesn't want police walking in on something private. His behavior after he's inside the house doesn't get any better either. Instead of calling Shannann's parents first, which is what any panic spouse would do, Chris starts firing off individual, almost scripted texts to different people. Then he goes into the bedroom, finds his wife's wedding ring sitting there, and this is the detail that should stop you cold. He goes and shows it to a neighbor. Why would you do that? Because if everyone believes Shanann took her ring off and walked away with the girls on her own, the narrative writes itself. She left. Nobody's looking for a killer if the wife supposedly left voluntarily. Still, strange behavior alone doesn't convict anyone. What breaks this case wide open is a neighbor named Nate and his garage camera. Nate offers to let police check his garage camera footage, since it has a partial angle on Chris's driveway. And the second Chris hears that offer, watch his composure completely fall apart. Here's what actually happened, pieced together afterward. Chris had left his wife's body in the bedroom, loaded her into his truck, driven back to load his daughters in as well, then took all three to the oil site. If Nate's camera had caught a clean angle, the whole case ends right there on day one. But Chris got lucky barely. The footage only shows a sliver of his truck. What it does show is that Chris pulled his truck into the garage that day, something he normally never did. He always parked outside. That one small habit change is the kind of detail an amateur documentary would cut for being too subtle. But real life doesn't work in dramatic reveals. It works in tiny inconsistencies like this one. And Nate isn't a detective. He's just a guy with a garage camera who trusts his gut. And his gut is telling him something is very wrong with his neighbor. You can watch him on that footage, arms crossed, shaking his head at Chris, visibly angry. And Chris, a grown man whose family is supposedly missing, puts his hands behind his head like he's the one under arrest, before anyone's even accused him of anything. There's an almost absurd moment buried in this footage too. While Nate is fumbling with the camera app, he accidentally flips it to a TV channel, and a documentary about childbirth happens to be playing at that exact second. Chris looks at the screen and tells police, unprompted, "My wife who's missing was pregnant." If a movie script had that coincidence in it, you'd call it lazy writing. Real life doesn't care about being believable. As the disappearance goes local, a news crew sits Chris down for an interview. And this is one of the most quoted pieces of footage in true crime history for a reason, because his words say one thing and his face says another. He talks about hoping Shanann and the girls are somewhere safe. He's asked, gently, if they'd argued before she disappeared. He says it wasn't really an argument, more of an emotional conversation, then trails off. Notice the language. He talks about his missing pregnant wife and 2 daughters the way you'd talk about misplacing your passport at the airport, mildly inconvenienced, vaguely concerned, completely composed. Compare that to how Shannah's actual friends react on camera in the same days. Raw panic, real tears, real fear. That's the baseline for how a person is supposed to sound when someone they love has vanished. Chris never hits that note. Not once. Now we go inside the police interview room. And this is where a sharp detective starts pulling the thread that eventually unravels everything. The detective asks Chris directly whether he did something to his wife or his kids. And listen to how Chris refers to his own daughters throughout this entire interrogation. He never once says my daughters or my girls. He says the kids, over and over. The kids. That emotional distance in his own choice of words tells you more about his relationship to his children than almost anything else in this case. And we'll come back to why that distance existed. When the detective pushes harder, essentially telling him, why should I believe anything you're saying, Chris doesn't get angry. He doesn't raise his voice. Instead, he goes straight into character defense. I'm a calm guy. I'm not about confrontation. I just want things to go back to normal. That's not what an innocent, terrified father says. That's what guilt sounds like when it's been rehearsing its own alibi. Then the detective asks him something almost surgical. If we find a man who took your family, what do you want us to do to him? Ask any real father that question and you'll get rage. You'll get let me have 5 minutes alone with him. Chris's actual answer is some version of I guess life in prison. I'm not sure that penalty even applies in Colorado. He's so uncomfortable performing anger at himself that he can't even fake the emotion convincingly. He's answering a hypothetical about himself, and he still can't land the human reaction. Shanann posted almost everything to social media. She was, by her own family's account, someone who documented her whole life online, which means we get to see the marriage from the inside, years before any of this happened. And here's the pattern across every single video. Chris never looks fully present. Not once. Shanann is the outgoing one, always narrating for the camera, genuinely enjoying herself. Chris looks like a man attending an event he didn't want an invitation to. In one video, his daughter hands him her plate and wants him to blow on her food to cool it down, a completely normal toddler request, and Chris looks confused, like he's failed to interpret a simple social cue from his own child, until Shanann has to translate it for him. That's not a man who's simply awkward on camera. That's a man whose attention has already left the building, because somewhere else in his head, there was another woman, a co-worker named Nicole Kessinger. The text messages between Chris and Shanann, pulled during the investigation, tell you exactly where the marriage actually died, long before the murders. At one point, Shanann takes the girls to visit her family for 5 weeks. During that entire stretch, Chris, by his wife's own messages, doesn't call to check on his own children even once. Shannah's texts go from confused to hurt to something close to resigned. I thought you missed us. Apparently not. Around the same period, Chris starts an affair with Nicole. And once you see the timeline, the romantic gift moment becomes almost unbearable to read. Shanann had given Chris a relationship book called Hold On to Your NUT, advice on staying close, staying passionate, staying honest. Chris never opens it. It ends up in the trash. We also know the couple's physical relationship had effectively ended before Shannah's final visit home. She comes back from that 5-week trip, and Chris doesn't so much as attempt a kiss. Around the same time, the ultrasound reveals the baby will be a boy, and for a moment Shanann clings to that as a reason to believe the marriage still has a future. She wasn't ready to accept what was actually happening. Before a business trip, Chris even leaves her a letter, the kind of letter that sounds, on its surface, like a man fighting to save his marriage. I've missed everything about you. I will always fight for you and for us. Read that letter today, knowing what came next, and it becomes one of the most disturbing documents in the entire case. Because it wasn't sincere. It was a performance for an audience of one person who still believed in him. And there's a piece of Shannah's own history worth sitting with here, because it explains why she held on so hard. She'd already been through one difficult divorce before Chris. That earlier collapse had damaged her trust in relationships and in herself. Fighting for this marriage wasn't just about love anymore. It had become about proving she wouldn't lose again. When the other side of the relationship is already gone, that kind of determination becomes tragic instead of admirable, because no amount of effort from one person can resurrect what only one person is actually still invested in. Nicole Kessinger deserves her own spotlight here, because her behavior afterward raises questions the documentaries rarely sit with long enough. After Chris's arrest becomes public, one of the first things she does is search for a woman named Amber Frey. If that name doesn't ring a bell, Amber Frey was the mistress of Scott Peterson, the man convicted of murdering his pregnant wife Lacey Peterson in one of the most famous cases in American true crime history. The parallels are almost too clean. Married man, pregnant wife, secret mistress. Wife turns up dead. Amber Frey later wrote a best-selling book about her experience being swept into that case. So why was Nicole looking her up minutes after Chris's arrest broke? We know Nicole was pushing to move fast, looking at wedding dresses online, expecting Chris to file for divorce soon. In their private messages, she'd tell him, in a clipped, almost irritated tone, to go take care of your kids, go take care of your wife, language that reads less like patience and more like counting days. And we know Chris deleted messages with her from right before and right after the murders. Investigators built an airtight case against Chris. What they never fully closed the loop on was exactly how much Nicole knew and when. Now let's go back 6 years before any of this, to 2012, early in the marriage. Chris was taking a communications course and had to record a presentation for class. That video is still sitting on YouTube today, and it might be the strangest piece of evidence in the entire case because of what he chose to talk about. Heavier, wearing glasses, visibly nervous, voice shaking, Chris stands up and gives a talk about relationship breakdown and repair. 6 years before he destroys his own marriage in the most violent way imaginable, he's lecturing a classroom on how relationships should be saved. At one point, he poses the question of whether children can save a struggling marriage. They can't. Kids don't fix a relationship that's already failing. At best, they stretch out the suffering a little longer before the same ending arrives anyway. Chris ends up proving his own thesis wrong in the cruelest possible way. He becomes a father so emotionally checked out that he stops calling his own daughters and eventually kills them. He also tells that classroom how important it is to keep emotional distance from someone attractive outside your marriage. Do as I say, not as I do, because years later, his own flirtatious work email to Nicole ends with him leaving his phone number at the bottom. Chris, in 2012, is essentially narrating the mistakes he was going to make in 2018. It's like watching someone hand you the ending of the movie in the opening scene, and you don't even notice until it's over. Here's the real question this case forces you to sit with. Was this a moment of blind rage, or was something planned out over weeks? Chris wants the world to believe it was rage. The evidence says otherwise. His first story to detectives was almost insultingly simple. My wife killed our daughters, and I couldn't handle it, so I killed her. When investigators didn't buy that for a second, he switched to version 2, that Shanann found out about the affair, told him he'd never see his daughters again, and he snapped. That story falls apart on its own logic. If he supposedly snapped with rage at his wife for threatening to take his daughters away, why would his next move be killing the daughters too? When both lies collapsed, Chris landed on his final position, blaming Nicole, saying she'd poisoned him against his own family. Every version of his story has one thing in common. Someone else is always the reason. Never once does responsibility land on him. So how do we actually know this was planned? Right after committing the murders, Chris pulled up the lyrics to a Metallica song on his phone. Lyrics about a hidden battery of rage inside a person. That's not the behavior of someone in a blind panic. That's someone who had already built a private narrative for himself, feeding a fantasy before he acted, then reaching for the same fantasy afterward to romanticize what he'd done. The rest of the timeline seals it. Almost immediately after the murders, Chris calls his daughter's school to withdraw them. He calls a realtor to list the house. In the space of hours, he wasn't grieving a missing family. He was closing out an old life like clearing items off a to-do list, so he could start building the new one. Which raises the obvious question. If he wanted a life with Nickel that badly, why not just get a divorce? No bodies, no body cam footage, no life sentence. The answer is almost pathetic once you understand Chris. This was a man who spent his entire life terrified of what other people thought of him. The moment the disappearance broke, one of his first messages to a coworker was asking whether other people at the office had heard about it yet. He wasn't checking in on grief. He was checking his reputation. Divorce, to him, meant becoming the guy who left his pregnant wife and 2 little girls for another woman, a label he found more unbearable than the alternative. And that's the piece of this case that's genuinely hard to sit with. So let's not skip past it. Chris didn't just target his wife. He killed 2 little girls who trusted him completely, girls who, by every account, loved their dad and had no idea what was coming. Shannann's own father said something that stayed with people who followed this case. He described his daughter as someone with real fight in her, someone who would have resisted with everything she had if she sensed she was in danger. And medical examiners found no signs of a struggle on her body, which points to something even darker. He most likely killed her while she was still asleep, giving her no chance to fight back at all. Whatever version of love Chris told himself he felt for Nickel and for the fantasy of a new life, it required erasing every piece of evidence that his old life and his old family had ever existed. 2 children who trusted their father completely became, in his mind, an obstacle to be removed rather than people to be protected. That's the part no psychological explanation makes easier to accept, and it shouldn't. Kids don't get a vote in decisions like this. They deserve protection, not to become collateral in somebody else's fantasy of a better life. In prison, Chris is reportedly isolated by other inmates and kept under protective watch. Even people convicted of serious crimes want nothing to do with a man who did this to his own children. He's since claimed to have found religion, blaming the entire tragedy on the devil's influence. Notice the pattern one final time. First he blamed his wife, then he blamed his mistress. Now he blames the devil. At no point does the actual person responsible ever show up in his own story. At sentencing, Shannann's brother delivered a victim impact statement that cuts through every excuse Chris has ever made. He spoke about losing his sister, his best friend, the protector, one of the most loved people in his family. He asked, directly, what gave Chris the right to lay hands on a woman, let alone his own wife, and on children who trusted him and loved him completely? He talked about crying himself to sleep in a hotel room during the trial, and about losing something he can never get back, the chance to simply be an uncle. There's one photo from this case that's hard to look at once you know the timeline. Shanann, smiling, sent to a friend just 1 week before she was murdered. She still didn't fully believe her husband was capable of what he'd already decided to do. She was exhausted, she was hurt, and she was still trying to hold her family together, pregnant, with 2 young daughters, doing all of it essentially alone. Chris was often described as the perfect example of a man who looks calm, quiet, and polite on the outside, while hiding something completely different underneath. And here's the part worth remembering next time you hear someone like him cry on camera. People don't usually cry because they're sorry for what they did. They cry because they got caught.